Hey everyone, so welcome to week 8's webinar in the Udacity Full Stack Web Developer Nano Degree program. So today we're going to talk about probably one of the most important topics for full stack web developers, and that is RESTful APIs. So what we're going to do is just go through some of the most important topics and ideas behind RESTful APIs, what they are exactly, the benefits of them, and just hopefully create a good foundation of how to think about them, how to approach creating them, and give some good insight into why you should be making them. And yeah, hopefully not repeating any of the information that's already provided in the Udacity videos, but give some alternative perspectives to just hopefully get a better understanding of exactly what they are, how to use them, and also hopefully get an appreciation for how important they are. So let's just get into it. So firstly, we're going to go just into APIs, not specifically RESTful APIs, and not building them in Python just yet, but really just go into what APIs are. So they are essentially exactly what the name says, application programming interfaces. And all that really means is you have an application and you have an interface. So you have the client and you have the server. Your browser is the client, and the server is what is storing all the information related to your application. And the interface would just be the way in which the client and the server are connected. So a practical example would be if you go into, say, Gmail. If you've got an application on your phone, the Gmail application, right? It's going to look quite different to the Gmail application or the Gmail website on your computer, on your desktop or your laptop. And the reason for that would be the screen size and the way that you interact with it, the application. So on your computer, you've got your mouse, you've got your keyboard, and on your phone, you're probably using your thumb or index finger or both to interact with the same information. So obviously you're going to want to, I know there's a lot of touchscreen laptops, but most people probably are not going to touch the screen when interacting with their Gmail, Gmail website when they're on their computer, but that's everybody quickly swaps when they, not in front of their computer and they need to check or write emails. They're using their fingers on their phone. And so different ways of interacting with the stuff obviously is going to change the way that the information is displayed. And in addition to the different ways in which you're interacting with your application, there's also another obvious big difference, and that is the screen size. And so when you've got far less real estate, like on a phone compared to on a computer, you have to reprioritize and see which information needs to fall away. And all of this makes it necessary, or at least in the past, until the recent past, it made it kind of necessary to have two different applications, right? You may have an Android application that sits on your phone and a web application that sits on your computer, for the reasons that we've just gone through. There's many other reasons. So, for example, accessibility. If you use one of these applications in a different way to other people, maybe a visually impaired person would need the information read out, as an example. That they're going to interact with the application in a different way to other people. So all I'm really getting at is that there's different ways to interact with the information, and so the information is displayed differently. But what's quite important is that the even though the information is displayed differently, and you interact with it in different ways, it's not this, and it's not different information. That's why I'm using, Gmail. It's the same email that you may be reading from the exact same person. When you started writing your email, saved it as a draft on your computer, and then got onto the train and carried on writing the email from your cell phone, it's the exact same information. And so in the past, you may have written different applications, right? But and now, some people still do that. But the important thing is it's the exact same information. So for you to be able to interact with it in the most useful way, you want the exact same information, regardless of how it's being displayed or where it's being displayed or how it's being interacted with. And I think that's a really important thing to get your head around before moving forward with APIs and API development. Okay. The point of the API is to have a standardized set of information that can be used in a myriad of different ways depending on how it's being consumed. And that is the purpose of APIs, right? Now, RESTful APIs are just a flavor of APIs, but it's not a standard. It's an architectural style, and I think lots of people have different opinions on why it's grown and why it is the dominant architectural style for building applications. But the most probably the most widely accepted is because of the rise of JavaScript, because essentially your APIs are going to be JSON objects, but that's a bit of a divergence. So an API is any service which provides information in a standardized way that can be consumed by a range of different clients. I gave one example, which is you or me, the end users of, say, Gmail, the Gmail application, but another might be a computer that's or Calendly, or some other application that takes the information from Gmail and does something else with it. So yeah, all of them would just take the same information, and this just makes it a whole lot easier to build a range of services when you know that there's a standardized way in which the information at the API endpoint is being presented. Okay, and why? Well, hopefully I've covered a bit of the why, but basically it just makes it very easy. You can just learn a basic set of skills, and that can allow you to build a whole range of services. So for example, say you built applications based off the endpoints of one application, and it was a RESTful API in Python, and then you wanted to go and do that again. Because of the standardized way in which the RESTful APIs are built, you would be able to do this quite easily. And this just makes building web applications a far less painful. So when I'm talking about compatibility, scalability, and flexibility, really what I'm getting at is that the APIs allow you to build for the compatibility would be for your information, your application that you've built is compatible for Android applications, iOS applications, native applications, or desktop applications, or other services that aren't used directly by the end user. And all of them are done the same, and making them all compatible is just obviously super useful. Scalability, say for example, you're building microservices, so a whole bunch of different mini applications used your data. and maybe many of them use the exact same data, but they use it in different ways. If you've got a single API endpoint for a certain bit of information, it's incredibly useful to do it that way. And then, of course, flexibility. So you can just present the exact same information in a whole range of different ways of this exact same API. So if the endpoint is the same, it allows you to focus on the specific delivery that you want for your information and not worry about doing it 100 different ways for the 100 different ways in which the information can be used. So REST. Now, what is REST? REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Sorry, I think I seem to always get that wrong. But essentially, this is just again, an architectural style, and it's just a way of creating web services. The main competitor to REST was SOAP, which was essentially XML, which isn't used that much. Well, I mean, I suppose it's still used a lot, but it's nowhere near experiencing the growth that JSON and REST services are. So what it is essentially is just a set of rules that describe how information is transferred, right? So the basic properties would be statelessness, which is essentially meaning that when information is sent, each bit of information that's sent between a client and server is a complete set of information, right? There's no, you don't change the state. There's always only a single state. The other main constraints would be the client server model. That's always how this is going to work. Whenever you're building a RESTful API, you always just have the client and the server. And then what you may also have is cacheability. Okay, so hopefully that explains roughly what it is. It's just an architectural style. Okay, and then why? Why would we use it? Well, it just, as JavaScript keeps growing, it's just this incredibly intuitive and useful for anyone that's building anything in JavaScript to really understand JSON, which is essentially JavaScript object notation. So it's just such a intuitive way of writing, or not writing, sorry, conveying information. People understand what an object is, they understand what a dictionary is in Python, and the value of them. It's just super, super useful. With the rise of non-relational databases like MongoDB, it's just, yeah, JSON is just amazing. And it's just super, super easy. I guess the real question would be, why wouldn't you use it? So I'm sure you guys have obviously gone through the Udacity content, but let me just see if I can find an example to show you. I know you can just Google yourselves. I just want to find a specific one to show you exactly what I mean. Let's see, JSON REST. Yeah. Basically, this would be an example, right? So you have an object, an employee, and nested in it would be all of the different information, right? That would be an object, and then an array would be a list of objects. So there's the list, and then there's the object, and then there's the next object, and then there's the next object. So essentially, your API would always just produce this information from your database. And it doesn't have to be, obviously does not have to be a non-relational database, collecting information from any database that you've built, probably using Postgres and SQLite for this web developer nano degree, but importing the Python library JSONify just puts the information in this format anyway. So essentially, this is just the most intuitive, human readable, actually, which is great, great for debugging. But that's exactly why you would use RESTful APIs. So when should you actually create these APIs? So you know what it is, right? You know why to use them. So maybe you want to know when to use them. So the Udacity goes into how to use them, going through the different HTTP methods, and so you might know how, but you don't really, but perhaps you don't yet know when, right? Or how to go about starting. And the answer, hopefully, you'll see and have seen already, is that there's an unlimited amount of uses for them. Like any way that anybody needs information, an API is probably the best way to do it. It's actually faster. It's basically, I guess, one way to look at it is it's a web application without any time and effort being spent in building a front end. So anytime you just, so for example, if you have a database that uploads, I don't know, all of your daily activities, then the API would allow you to upload, with a post request, your daily activity. It would allow you to fetch all of the activities, based on how you build your API endpoint. So you could have like, activities slash date slash, and then you're at the date, or activity slash today, or by category, activity slash sports, and I'll show you all the sporting activities you did. Essentially, any type of anything, any application that you can possibly think of where there's a persistent storage, so a database at the back where you store information, right? And then you want to, and someone, you or anyone else, will benefit from retrieving that information, right? Which essentially is what a web application is. That's a good time to use an API. So maybe a good way to say it is when not to create an API. And the only possible answer, although it's not a great answer, or it's maybe a good answer because it gets across how important APIs are, is perhaps when you think of a Django application. So a Django application in itself is not RESTful. You don't build the endpoints exactly like you do in Flask. That's probably why Udacity went with teaching Flask first, which I personally think is fantastic. It's so good that you're able to see the actual endpoints with your URL routing, and you see each GET request and POST request, or GET method and POST method, and listing, say, for example, specific resources or lists of resources. So the only time you wouldn't is with Django. But then Django realized like how important RESTful services are, and so they built, well, not they did, but there's an additional framework called the Django REST framework. So basically just turning Django into an API service. So for example, maybe just, it should be a bit obvious now, but when would you create an API? So for example, say you had an application that you built. So maybe the item catalog application that you build at in this nano degree, right? So maybe you build your web application and it looks great, but now you want it to be useful on a mobile. So if you've built your application correctly, you don't have to worry about managing the information or anything. Your mobile application would simply have to link up to your API endpoints. The information and the architecture and the backend and everything doesn't even need to be touched if you've built your APIs correctly. And then, for example, say other people want to use some of the products you've used and incorporate it into theirs. So that's exactly what happens with big companies. So big web applications, will always have a developer site. Maybe one useful one that's not, I don't know, not as like obviously, you can go to developers.facebook.com, obviously, console.google.com, and go and check all of their APIs that are available for you to use and build into your applications. So I'm sure you know this, but like, the Maps API, YouTube, Gmail. That there's just so many that you can just take advantage of their API endpoints and incorporate it in yours. So that's when you would want to use it as well. Say your application starts to grow and you want other people to use the information, and this could earn you more if the goal is you creating an application as a business, and you want to earn money. This could earn you more money. So yeah, basically, anytime you build a web application, that's probably a great time to use APIs, RESTful APIs. So now we have a good understanding, right? But the real deep understanding will come from experience. So from building your own applications, from listening to other points of view on how to build them and why. So some great tools to get going would be curl, which is just a command line tool for creating and receiving and just building your basically building APIs. So I think that there's a Udacity course on it. So or at least one of the courses touches on curl. But there's plenty of YouTube videos on how to use it. Super fun, super easy. That's if say you get home from work and you've just got an hour and you want to just learn quickly. There's not much setup or anything. There's not much learning that's required. There's just a couple of commands that, after using them a few times, you just start to memorize them. So curl is great for that. But now when you want to build more complicated, or not complicated, but more complex or detailed applications, or API endpoints, then Postman is a great tool for that. So there's also a lot of YouTube tutorials on Postman, and I think that the sooner you allow Postman to become your friend and you really understand the ins and outs of it, the better. So yeah, I would suggest that you just dive as deep into API development as possible and just get going with it. Some resources for you to go about doing this would be, obviously, as I say, you can find so much on YouTube now or on the net if you prefer reading. It's actually faster, I guess. Firstly, I would just say an approach to getting the most out of resources is just to start making APIs. Just make your own and make lots of them. So all you need is a backend. So hopefully you've built something already. If you haven't, then you can, build APIs that connect to other people's backends. But the best way probably is to build your own, or actually, sorry, to do both, and then to listen to all the different ways that other people are using them. So here are 3 links that I think are great to YouTube videos. The first one is an explanation of what an API is. It's a great layman's term explanation. It's got over 3 million views, so it's obviously very, very popular. The second one is another explanation, just from a completely different perspective, with over 1 million views. And then the last one I think is super useful because it's completely different to all the work that you are doing in this nano degree, but super, super relevant. So what it is a tutorial, a short one, about 15 minutes, which teaches you how to build an application, right, using MongoDB and Django REST framework, both of which you haven't used in this nano degree, but the APIs are what you incidentally built. The best part about it is that the point of the tutorial is not to build APIs. The point of the tutorial is to teach you how to use MongoDB and Django REST framework. But in 15 minutes, it's super intuitive, and you would have built your own fancy little application, right? So to me, I would definitely go and do this. Yeah, it takes less time. This is it. It's this pretty printed. Basically, build MongoDB backed RESTful API with Python and Flask. Sorry, I thought that they used Django REST framework, but essentially, yeah. So you use Flask, so it should be even faster and easier for you to do. It takes 15 minutes. So I would highly recommend doing this. I think if you did this, worked with them, with Anthony from Pretty Printed going through this, and then you did it yourself, you dedicated 45 minutes to this, you could, have be building your own APIs. So this hopefully is good supplementary information related to the API course that Udacity has provided. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully, you guys have got something useful out of this, and I'll catch you next week with the next webinar. Probably I'll try and do it on Monday or Tuesday, unless anybody has a specific time they prefer. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye-bye.